He takes his medications every morning without fail, watches his sodium, walks 30 minutes most days, and goes to his checkups on schedule. He is doing almost everything right. But there is a small jar in the back of his pantry that has been sitting there untouched for 8 months. Something his daughter bought him after reading about it online. He picked it up once, was not sure what to do with it, and put it back. That jar, it turns out, might be the single most accessible cardiovascular addition his routine is missing. There is a category of cardiovascular nutrition that almost never comes up during a standard appointment, not because it is unproven, but because the visit is already full by the time medications, blood pressure, and cholesterol have been covered. Seeds, specifically flaxseed, also called linseed, occupy a genuinely well-researched position in the nutritional management of blood pressure, arterial stiffness, and inflammatory vascular load. The evidence is not preliminary. Multiple peer-reviewed trials have examined flaxseed's effects on cardiovascular markers in older adults, and the results are consistent enough that a number of international clinical nutrition guidelines now include flaxseed as a recommended dietary addition for cardiovascular risk reduction. What remains inconsistently communicated is how to use it, when to use it, how much is meaningful, and what common mistakes cancel its benefit. That gap is what this video is for. My name is Dr. Evan Noris. I am a cardiologist with 22 years of clinical experience, with a focus on integrative cardiovascular risk reduction in adults over 60. What motivated this particular video is watching patients spend money and effort on supplements that have weak evidence, while ignoring something with strong evidence that costs almost nothing. After 60, the cardiovascular system's relationship with dietary inputs becomes more sensitive and more consequential. The arterial walls have accumulated decades of mechanical stress, and in many people, some degree of atherosclerotic change, plaque deposits that have been building quietly and that narrow the channels through which blood flows. Think of the arteries as pipes that were once smooth and flexible, and have, over time, developed rough patches and reduced elasticity. Blood pressure rises partly because of this reduced compliance. The vessels cannot expand to accommodate the same flow. Inflammatory processes in the artery wall, driven by oxidative stress and dietary patterns, contribute to the progression of that roughening and narrowing. Flaxseed addresses several of these mechanisms simultaneously. Its alpha-linolenic acid, the plant-based omega-3, reduces systemic inflammation and improves the flexibility of artery walls. Its lignans, which are plant compounds with antioxidant and mild estrogenic properties, reduce oxidative stress in the vascular endothelium, the inner lining of the arteries. And its soluble fiber slows glucose absorption, reduces LDL cholesterol absorption in the gut, and supports the gut microbiome in ways that have downstream cardiovascular effects. No single supplement does all of this. This small seed does. Before I walk through the 5 things most seniors get wrong about flaxseed, I want to ask you something. Have you ever used flaxseed? Or have you heard of it but never tried it? Just type "tried" or "not yet" in the comments. I want to understand where this community is starting from. The first and most consequential mistake is using whole flaxseed instead of ground flaxseed. Whole flax seeds pass through the digestive system almost entirely intact. The outer hull is hard enough that the body cannot break it down, which means the oils, lignans, and fiber inside the seed never reach the bloodstream or the gut in meaningful quantities. You can eat whole flaxseed every day for months and absorb essentially none of its cardiovascular benefit. Ground flaxseed, also called milled flaxseed or flaxseed meal, has had the hull broken down mechanically, releasing the internal compounds for digestion and absorption. This is not a minor distinction. Research from the University of Manitoba, including a landmark meta-analysis published in Nutrition Reviews, examined multiple trials comparing dietary flaxseed interventions and found consistent, measurable reductions in both systolic and diastolic blood pressure, specifically in adults with hypertension who used ground flaxseed over a period of 12 weeks or more. A woman named Leonora, a former cartographer who had applied extraordinary precision to her professional work and brought the same precision to her health management, came to see me after 6 months of daily flaxseed consumption, with no measurable change in her blood pressure or her LDL. When I asked her to describe how she was using it, she described sprinkling whole seeds over her salad. She switched to ground flaxseed stirred into her morning oatmeal and saw her LDL move meaningfully within 8 weeks. The practical fix: always use ground flaxseed. If you buy whole seeds, grind them in a coffee or spice grinder before use. Pre-ground flaxseed meal is available at most grocery stores and is equally effective. The second mistake is storing ground flaxseed incorrectly. The omega-3 oils inside flaxseed are highly polyunsaturated, which means they oxidize quickly when exposed to heat, light, or air. Oxidized flaxseed oil does not simply lose its cardiovascular benefit. It generates oxidized lipid compounds that are themselves mildly inflammatory, meaning rancid flaxseed actively works against the goal of reducing vascular inflammation. Ground flaxseed left in a warm pantry in an open container can begin to oxidize within days. Proper storage, in an airtight container, in the refrigerator or freezer, away from light, preserves the integrity of the oils for weeks to months. A man named Prentice, a former electronics technician, who had spent his career understanding how components degrade when exposed to the wrong conditions, came to see me having used ground flaxseed faithfully for 3 months, with results he found disappointing. When I asked about his storage method, he described keeping an open bag on the counter next to the stove. Heat, light, and air, the 3 conditions that accelerate oxidation. The smell, when he thought about it, was slightly off. He had been consuming rancid flaxseed, which is harmless, but not helpful. Moving it to an airtight jar in the refrigerator and replacing his current supply changed his experience considerably over the following 2 months. The practical fix: store ground flaxseed in an airtight container in the refrigerator or freezer. If it smells off or slightly bitter, discard it and replace it. Freshness is not a minor detail. It is the difference between a functional food and an inert one. The third mistake is using too little to produce a meaningful effect. The dose that has been studied consistently in flaxseed cardiovascular research, including the trials reviewed in the Nutrition Review's meta-analysis, is typically in the range of 25 to 40 grams of ground flaxseed per day, which is approximately 2 to 3 tablespoons. Many people who add flaxseed to their diet use a teaspoon, roughly 4 to 5 grams, because they are unsure how much is appropriate, or because they are cautious about introducing something new. At that dose, the fiber and lignin content is low enough that meaningful cardiovascular effects are unlikely to appear in clinical markers. This is not the same as saying small amounts are harmful. They are not. But the gap between a teaspoon and 2 tablespoons is the gap between a decorative addition and a therapeutic one. A woman named Beatrix, a former civil servant with an orderly and cautious approach to everything new in her life, had been adding a pinch of ground flaxseed to her morning yogurt for 4 months and reporting to her daughter that she was using it regularly. When her daughter asked how much, and they measured it together, it was less than half a teaspoon. Her cardiovascular markers had not moved, increasing to 2 full tablespoons, introduced gradually over 2 weeks to allow the digestive system to adjust to the increased fiber, produced measurable changes in her LDL by her next appointment. The practical fix: work toward 2 tablespoons of ground flaxseed per day, introduced gradually. Start with 1 teaspoon and increase by a teaspoon every 3 to 4 days to minimize any digestive adjustment period. If you are still with me and finding this useful, type the word seeds in the comments right now. It tells me who is staying through the full conversation, and that genuinely helps. The fourth mistake is pairing flaxseed with the wrong foods at the wrong time, particularly taking it with a large amount of fat from dairy or oils in the same sitting. Flaxseed's soluble fiber works partly by binding to cholesterol-containing bile acids in the gut and carrying them out of the body before they can be reabsorbed, a mechanism that lowers LDL over time. When flaxseed is eaten alongside a high-fat meal, the fat stimulates a large release of bile acids that the fiber cannot fully bind, reducing the efficiency of this mechanism. Flaxseed is most effective consumed with a moderate or lower fat meal, or as part of a higher carbohydrate base like oatmeal or a smoothie, where the fiber can do its work with a manageable bile acid load. A man named Cormac, a former sheep farmer who had the practical, no-nonsense orientation that comes from a life of direct problem-solving, had been stirring ground flaxseed into full-fat Greek yogurt with cream every morning, a breakfast he genuinely enjoyed, and was not willing to change dramatically. When we shifted the flaxseed to his oatmeal earlier in the morning and kept the yogurt as a separate snack, his LDL response to the flaxseed improved. The yogurt remained in his routine, only the pairing changed. The practical fix: eat flaxseed with oatmeal, a smoothie, whole grain toast, or another moderate fat base for best effect. It does not need to be complicated. Stirred into oatmeal or blended into a morning smoothie is the simplest and most consistent approach. The fifth mistake is expecting results in 2 to 4 weeks and stopping when they do not appear. Flaxseed's cardiovascular effects are cumulative and gradual. The research showing meaningful blood pressure reduction and LDL improvement consistently points to 12 weeks or more of daily use before clinically significant changes appear in blood markers. This is not a slow supplement. It is a food that works through the same gradual biological mechanisms as dietary fat reduction or increased physical activity. The lignans take time to shift the oxidative environment of the artery wall. The fiber takes time to consistently alter cholesterol reabsorption. People who start flaxseed with enthusiasm and stop after a month because their blood pressure reading at a doctor's visit has not changed are abandoning a tool that was beginning to work. A woman named Odette, a former fabric designer with an artistic temperament and a low tolerance for delayed gratification, started ground flaxseed based on her doctor's suggestion and stopped after 5 weeks when her home blood pressure readings had not shifted. She came to see me, mentioning it almost as a failed experiment. When I explained the 12-week research timeline and she agreed to resume and monitor properly, her blood pressure had moved meaningfully by her 3-month follow-up. The practical fix: commit to 12 weeks of consistent daily use before evaluating whether flaxseed is producing a cardiovascular effect for you. Track your blood pressure at home during that period so you have accurate data rather than relying on single office readings. Here is what I want you to do starting today. Buy ground flaxseed, or a coffee grinder if you prefer to grind your own from whole seeds. Store it in an airtight container in the refrigerator. Begin with 1 teaspoon stirred into oatmeal, a smoothie, or yogurt, and increase by a teaspoon every 3 to 4 days until you reach 2 tablespoons daily. Keep it there for at least 12 weeks. Track your blood pressure at home during that period. Morning readings, same time each day, before medications, and bring that log to your next appointment. That is all. This is one of the most evidence-supported, lowest cost, lowest risk cardiovascular additions available to adults over 60, and most people who would benefit from it have a jar sitting untouched in the back of their pantry. Everything I have shared today is meant to open a conversation with your physician, not replace one. Flaxseed interacts with certain medications, blood thinners in particular, and the appropriate dose and timing for your situation should be discussed with your doctor, especially if you are managing multiple cardiovascular conditions. Please bring this to your next appointment. And if the idea that simple, inexpensive foods can produce measurable cardiovascular benefits has you thinking about what else your kitchen already contains, the next topic I want to explore with you is a common spice most seniors use for cooking that the research now links to meaningful improvements in blood pressure and arterial flexibility.